Somewhere right now, a CFO is sitting in a review meeting. The system went live 6 months ago. The board wants the cash position. He opens the screen, three numbers, three different systems, and three different answers. He pauses and says the two words I have heard more than any other in a decade of ERP implementation define real. The implementation cost of SR 40 million. The go live was celebrated and the vendor called it success. The CFO cannot tell his board and right now live what is the organization cash position is. So my guest today has spent 36 years being called into the room as an expert witness. He has read the document that was never meant to see by anyone outside the project team, and he has built the only ERP design against failure, not for the success. Dr. James Robertson, the ERP doctor, this is the execution gap.
Thank you, Younus. It's a pleasure to be on the call. I think we've got a lot to discuss.
Welcome back to the Execution Gap, the series of CFO and the finance director who are done pretending that strategy and execution are the same conversation. I am Mohammed Younus. I am a D365 finance architect. I spend my days inside the financial systems of the mega project and the ERPs and the consolidation engine. The audit trials that either hold up under board scrutiny or collapse at the wrong moment. On the episode 1, we have spoke to the Alex Malaf, Saudi Arabia's largest national developer, building 400,000 homes. And for the next episode, we have spoke to the man who has managed $960 million for the FIFA World Cup Qatar 2022. And he has came out with a zero audit finding. Apart from that, we have also joined with Dr. Mark Bendemer, the World Economic Forum member, who said the line, I want James to respond it today, rejects the unprepared operations. So today my guest has spent 36 years being into the person you call after the project has failed. He discipline that does not design for success. He design against the failure. He is an expert witness in ERP litigation and he just launched the Institution of Business System Practitioners because after 36 years of watching this industry refused to hold itself accountable. He decided to do it himself. The ERP doctor, James, welcome to the Execution Gap.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much. James, I have seen the 70% failure rate, 30 years, not, James, 70% failure rate, 30 years, not 1 percentage point of improvement. Honest answer, is the industry trying to fix this, or is a failure the product?
The problem is that the industry makes a lot of money out of failure. Failure is very profitable. The root cause is that the industry does not understand fundamental engineering principles. What I realized many years ago in this industry, I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and I have a doctorate in civil engineering. And what I realized many years ago is that in 4 years as an undergraduate student, we never once talked about success. We spent 4 years learning how to prevent failure. And so that gives
Great.
rise to my dictum that engineers do not design bridges to stand up. They design bridges not to fall down. The ERP industry has spent the last 30 plus years trying to build bridges to stand up. And because they do not design out failure, failure is what they get. And once you start designing against failure, you realize that there are all sorts of things that the industry does organically that are fundamentally flawed. The industry as a whole follows a broadly, generally similar approach. They start with process mapping and then they do the rest. And they start with mid-level management without any clear strategic direction, without any vision of where the organization is going, without any understanding of what the executives lead. And then they try and build up and they wonder when they get to the strategic executive level why nothing works and why nothing fits together. Because they start at the back end of the process and they try and they're wedded to it. Unfortunately, they come at it from a process-centric point of view. They come at it from a point of view that does not recognize they have to design against failure. They get failure and they progressively get better at doing what they're doing that's causing the failure. So there's an element of it which is just straight classic incompetence, and there's an element of it which is Actually, we make a lot of money doing it this way. Why should we change? And there's a bit of both. I think there are some sincere practitioners who are getting bad results and really want to do better, but they don't know how. They need to understand design against failure. And there's some others that I think are quite cynical about it, to be quite honest.
Correct. James, you said your background is civil engineering. So I wanted to use that for a moment because I think the most important idea in this conversation, a civil engineer does not write a business case for a bridge staying up. They design the bridge so that every way it could fail and has been anticipated, tested, and eliminated before the first bolt is tightening. ERP project do the exact opposite.
Yes, absolutely.
So they design for the success case, optimistic timelines, and the vendor blessed business cases. So assumptions that you have never have been stressed or stress tested. What happens when you flip the logic completely, and what are the failure modes that nobody puts in the risk register because the acknowledging them would stop the project from being approved?
There are a number of points there. Big
Yeah,
one is what I call technology obsession. People think that ERP is technology.
correct.
It's a machine, but you don't
Right,
build your entire life around the motor car. The
right,
motor car is simply a means of getting from A to B, and if you can get from A to B by another way, maybe the public transport in your city is very good, or whatever the case may be, you use whatever is there. ERP
correct.
is just the machine. The problem is the way the machine is configured, the way it is used. There are a number of things that go wrong. The first thing that goes wrong, and it's about 30% of the problems that I've seen. I've done dozens of these investigations, and I sat down some years ago and I classified all of what I'd seen, and I wrote the book, The Critical Factors for IT Investment Success, and presented courses on why your ERP is not delivering and how to fix it. And a large part of my career, I've been investigating these things. So the first thing that goes wrong is this thing that I call mythology, and that is attaching human-like behavior to technology. That's about
Right,
30% of why projects fail. The next, roughly 20%, is the lack of executive custody. The ERP is transverse and cross-cutting. It runs across the entire enterprise. The owner of that integrated, holistic view of the business is the chief executive and only the chief executive. Therefore,
right,
the chief executive must be the custodian, and I use the word custodian, not sponsor. Custodian
right,
as in, I am fully responsible for the outcome of this project, and you better believe I'm going to kick ass if you guys
right.
don't pull together. And you cascade that leadership down through the project. That radically changes things. That's about 22% of what goes wrong. You then get into a lack of strategic alignment. So the business got to where it is today by doing certain things. Once upon a time, it started out as one or two or three people getting together and saying, let's do this. And it grew and
Right,
it was successful and it was profitable and it grew and it grew and it grew to a position where it now has the surplus cash to be able to say, let's put in a new ERP. You need to understand how it got there. You need to understand how you enhance that and build on it and how you're going to get there and take it further.
right,
Absence of
exactly.
that is about another 17 or 18% of why projects go wrong.
True.
Then you need to model the real world. The ERP should be a model of the enterprise. So if I look at the chart of accounts and I know very little about the business, I should be able to read the chart of accounts like a story
Right,
and understand exactly the financial model of the business. I should be able to read the item class like a story and understand exactly what the products are, and so on and so on and so forth. They don't do that. They just hack it. I have seen some absolutely horrible charts of accounts and item classes, so much so that in one case, uh, the chart of accounts was so bad that the company was flying blind and they went bankrupt. In another case, the client was big SAP implementation, 60,000 employees. I spoke to the CEO.
hmm,
How would you rate SAP? He said, on an operational level, I give it 7 or 8 out of 10. The business is running well. At a strategic executive level, I give it 1 out of 10. I have 4 senior accountants with teams who spend 3 weeks a month in Excel producing the board pack because they can't get the information they need out of SAP.
correct.
So
So,
you
yeah, yeah,
so you
please go
you
ahead.
you take those 4 things together, and that's 80% of why projects
Mhm.
fail. The rest is incident. And just by the way, in all the investigations I've done, 3% of the failures were related to technology.
Correct.
And everything else that looks like technology is because human beings have done something wrong.
So, James, nobody would board a plane designed the way ERP projects are implemented. So, is that a fair statement, or if it is, why has no one with your credibilities said this publicly at the scale before now?
So I'm an engineer. I'm not a marketer. And
Right.
when, when I went into business on my own in 1989, nobody took me aside and said, James, look, just by the way,
Mhm.
you may be good technically, but this is actually about marketing and growing your business. I didn't get that. It took me years to get that. So it's taken me years to say I really publicize it. And in actual fact, what it's I've kept such a low
True.
that it's only really in
Mhm.
the last 9 months or so that I've been actually extravagantly marketing myself. I sat down in the middle of last year and somebody said to me, you know, you've got all this intellectual property, but you need to turn it
Mhm.
into a product. You need to productize your methodology. And this is where my ERP accelerator comes from. So June, July last year, I sat down and I put it all together and I said, if I look at all the successes that I've had, how did I do it? And then
True.
somebody said to me, well, you know, that's not actually getting you because nobody knows about it. You better get on LinkedIn and start getting active. So end of November, I got on LinkedIn and started posting and commenting, and that's where you and I met. And so it's really since, let's call it beginning of December, that I've been actively sort of jumping on my soapbox and saying, hey guys. And then, you know, about 6, 8 weeks ago, I looked at this and as a civil engineer, you grow up with the institution of civil engineering, with the
Mhm.
Engineers Council. You grow up where you have to get a professional license. You get up where there's a code of ethics, and there's
Exactly.
continuing education. You have to have a license. You need to maintain that license. If you get it wrong, you can lose your license. And in fact, in where I come from in South Africa, if you're negligent and you kill people, you can end up in jail as an engineer. And I've said
Correct.
a little bit tongue in cheek a number of occasions recently. If you have that level of stringent control in the ERP industry, 3/4 of the practitioners would be in jail.
Perfect.
So I've only really been marketing actively for a few months, and then with that, as I say, a few months ago, I realized, you know, there's no professional ethical control here. So I coined the term the Institute of Business System Practitioners, which we launched 2 weeks ago, and I was elected as president. And we've got a charter, we've got a constitution, we've got a code of ethics, and basically we are now starting to bootstrap up a body of people in the industry who
Right.
are dedicated to setting high standards and holding people to account. A few weeks ago, we launched the Institute of Business System Practitioners. I was elected as president, and our goal is that within 5 years, any business that wants to implement an ERP or other business system, and this includes AI, by the way, most of what I'm saying applies to AI. It's even more pronounced with regard to AI than it is with regard to ERP.
Okay.
So our goal is that within 5 years, any organization that wants to institute and implement an ERP will come to us and say, please nominate an accredited provider.
No.
So
True.
that's where we're heading.
Great. So, James, I need to stop and put myself inside this conversation. I sell D365. I am a Microsoft implementation partner, and I am one of the people you are describing. So, tell me honestly, am I part of the problem? And where does the implementation partner who genuinely wants the client to succeed fit inside the model you just described?
So you're part of the problem and you're also part of the solution. You're part of the problem because
True.
the problem is, you know, the fact of the matter is that there are thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of practitioners like you around the world who are sincerely doing the best and
True.
doing what is regarded as best practice. The fact that it's
True.
upside down and back to front and doesn't work hasn't dawned on people. It's dawned on you now because you've heard me. But it hasn't dawned on the majority. They just keep going and going and going, doing the wrong
Mhm.
things and getting better and better and doing the wrong things. And this is this is what the whole idea of the IBSP is about. We've got a meeting scheduled in 2 months' time where we're getting senior practitioners together, and we're going to go through a strategic process to say what are the critical issues with regard to ERP implementation and how do we turn that around. And we're looking to create an industry standard methodology which will probably be based on my ERP accelerator, but informed now by a whole group of senior practitioners who say, now that you mention it, yes, that's important. How do we do that? We also in April, no, sorry, in May, we're having a session where we're having a round table, because one of the
Okay.
things that I realized recently, I've been working in the executive suite, in the C-suite since 1981.
Great.
I find it easier to talk to a CEO than I talk to the financial manager. And I was posting on LinkedIn and saying, guys, you need to get the CEO's custodian. And this guy said to me, well,
True.
what do I do? If I can't get, I said, well, you walk away from the project. He said, if I did that, I wouldn't have any work because I don't know how to talk to the CEO. I said, oh,
Exactly.
goodness, that's interesting. That had never occurred to me. So we're actually going to have a session to say, how do you escalate a project at inception into the hands of the CEO?
Hmm.
So we're going to build up a body of knowledge, which is how do you run these projects successfully? How do you the thing with bridges is, I don't know how many million bridges there are in the world, but if one bridge falls down, it's front page news. There was that Minneapolis
Correct.
failure in 2007, and it was world news within minutes because bridges don't fall down. So what I'm looking for is that it becomes world news if an ERP project fails, because ERP projects just run like that.
Hmm. Okay. Great. Here is my reality, James. I walked into the CFO's office recently. 11 years in his role, an SAR 400 million operation. I asked him his exact cash position. 8 seconds of silence, then two words: define real. SAP said one number, the project module said another, and treasury had a third. Three systems and three answers to the same question. So I'm supposed to walk in as the solution to that. So how do I do that without becoming exactly what you are describing?
So I will guarantee you to a level of about 99% that problem is a result of what I call sloppy configuration. So
Mhm,
you've got parameters in the one system that are set up differently to the parameters in the second system, that are set up
mhm,
differently to the parameters in the third system. That's not right. The parameters, there should be one set of parameters that models the entire reality of the business, that is transverse and cuts across all systems, which means you have to
mhm.
step right back. You need to go up to the executive strategic view and say, how do I describe the business? And then you need
All
to
right.
put that into very detailed, very structured codes so that everything is the same across all systems. So you've got to find the lowest common denominator, this finest level of detail that's common across all of those systems, and then you need to build your code scheme up from that. And
Great.
virtually nobody understands that. I got there. I did biology at school and taxonomies. I studied library classification schemes for my PhD, for my data. I was in the army for a while, and I was involved with the NATO filing system. So when I started implementing ERPs, I just automatically produced these very structured hierarchies, and I got fabulous results. And then I discovered nobody else was doing it, and nobody else understood it. So that's part of that's a core part of what I'm championing.
That's great. So, James, tell me about the requirement document written after go live, because you might have seen this people before going into the courtroom. So, tell this audience at this level of specificity what you are actually talking about, what we are actually talking about.
Well, I think the ERP industry is characterized by litigation, isn't it? I mean, there's this big court case going on in the States at the moment, and there failed projects like Birmingham City Council, 300 million pounds, Oracle, total disaster, Lidl, 500 million euros, 7 years, total disaster. The thing that you start with, if you're building a bridge, is a detailed architectural design. Virtually nobody does anything that looks like that when it comes to an ERP. They just climb
Mhm.
in and they start doing things. So when they find themselves going into court, they lack the fundamental fabric to stand up in court and say, we had a clear vision of what we were doing and this is what we did and we did exactly what we said we were going to do. So that, I guess in some cases they retrofit it.
So, how often is this deliberate, and how often is it nobody stopping to ask the question? Because one of this is a broken process, so other is something considerably more serious.
It's a difficult one. I've met and I've worked with and encountered a lot of very sincere practitioners who sincerely
Mhm.
wrong, but there's an element to it which says, you know what, we make so much money out of this that there's no incentive to change. And part of that is that particularly as you get higher up the scale of businesses, you've got these huge, you've got the group of four global consulting stroke accounting houses. And what they do is they put people out with an MBA and 2 or 3 years of post university experience, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, to do mundane, useless things, and they charge ridiculous rates for them. And they make a fabulous profit. So if they end up in court now and again, well, you know what, we're making so much money, it doesn't really matter. So there's a cynical,
Mhm.
I don't think it's done deliberately. They're all doing it sincerely, but they're not acting with integrity and stepping back and saying, now, why did that happen? And that
Correct.
speaks very much to the fact that they're not engineers. They haven't been steeped in a mindset which says prevent failure. So they don't think
Correct.
that way. I'm going to say something which is people are going to find offensive. But the problem is that most of this comes out of accounting and most of it comes out of an audit model. And an audit model is you put junior clerks on site 8 hours a day,
Mhm.
5 days a week, and you bill like crazy. And that's a lot of what the ERP industry does, certainly at the middle to top tier. And
Right.
it's cynical and it's wrong. So it's a toss up between how much is incompetence and how much of it is actual. As I said,
Correct.
if you applied a rule that if you damage a business due to negligence, you'll end up in jail, 3/4 of the industry would be in jail.
Correct. So we'll speak on the GCC side. Saudi Arabia is spending $500 billion on NEOM alone, and Roshan is building 400,000 homes. Diria is at like cultural destination, carrying 300 years of national heritage into a new country. What does this region need to hear from someone with no vendor and no commercial interest in the answer? That nobody is selling into it, will say.
So wherever you are with any of those projects, I would say to you, starting now, today, if the chief executive of that organization is not the custodian of that project, that needs to happen today. If that means you have to fly me to Saudi Arabia and I have to sit with that chief executive and explain to that chief executive why the chief executive needs to be the custodian, then so be it. But somehow in each of those cases, the CEO needs to take on custody. The second thing is you need to define the strategic essence of the organization. Why is it there? How does it succeed? How does it make its money or whatever it is? If it's a not-for-profit that's just there for the cultural thing, how does it generate the cultural benefit that it's supposed to do this? You mentioned 300 years of history. So that's a core defining element. What is it that makes this business successful? Once you've got those two pieces in place, then you need to look at how the project is running, and you need to say, you know what, if you're so busy mapping processes, you need to stop and you need to do what I call precision configuration. So we need to look at the chart of accounts. We need to look at the item class, and particularly with your 300 years of history, the item class is going to be quite a complicated thing. And I guarantee you, with
True.
90% certainty, that if I was to come in tomorrow and look at those three projects, the way they're doing the chart of accounts, the item class, the dimensions, et cetera, is shabby, sloppy, and is going to get in the way of a high quality solution. You fix those three things and you'll turn those projects around.
Correct. So, and James, this is exactly why I reached out to you, because the conversation happening inside the GCC right now is almost entirely vendor led. So, the Microsoft partner says D365, the SAP partner says S4 HANA, and the Oracle partner says stay on Oracle, and the CFO in the middle has no independent voice in the room. What do you say to that CFO before they sign anything?
What I would say to that CEO, number one, CEO in charge. Number two, define your strategy. Number three, out of the strategy, determine what is your strategic requirement. What are the business requirements that are non-negotiable.
Okay.
Then you look at Business Central, you look at S4HANA, you look at Oracle, you say, is any of these qualified or disqualified? Now, just to put that in context, in Germany trashed a 500 million euro 7 years SAP implementation because the version of SAP that they tried to implement was fundamentally incompatible with their strategic pricing model. They could have determined that in the first week of the project and said SAP is not a suitable avenue for us. So there may be a fundamental strategic driver in each of those projects that you've mentioned that says, okay, well, this one's going to work and this one's not going to work. If that's not the case, the issue then becomes who is the implementation partner for each of those. So you're saying to the vendors, who's going to implement? And if the vendor's saying, well, we're going to implement ourselves, then you say, right, introduce us to the team that's going to do this. But you have to have done the exercise of escalating the project to the CEO, of getting the strategic definition in place and clearly defining what you want before you have the conversation that we're talking about. Then you say, right, give me the team that understands my strategic drivers and can explain to me how they are going to manage this project to deliver on that. Now, there's a key piece there. The prime contractor is not the vendor. The prime contractor is the business.
Correct.
The business has to be in charge because it's a business project. And if you abdicate to the vendor, you're going to get a mess. The vendor is a contractor. They're a facilitator. They're expert on the software. They're not an expert on your business. This is where I advocate something that I call a strategic project leader, because I've said that the CEO must be the custodian, but the CEO doesn't have the knowledge and doesn't have the experience and doesn't have the time. So you need to bring in a senior person like myself. There are quite a few people that I'm talking to on LinkedIn who have potentially got the potential to do this. But you bring somebody in like myself alongside the CEO and you advise the CEO. And so the CEO says, you know what, I don't like what's happening here. What do you make of it? And this advisor says X, Y, Z. And then you make that advisor also an agent of the CEO. So the CEO says, right, let's do this. That person then says, I've discussed this with the CEO. This is the way we're going to do it. Things go on. The advisor's all over the project, says, okay, this is not working. Finance says this, operations says that, marketing says that, logistics says that. We need an overarching view. We push it up to the CEO, and the CEO says this is the way it's going to be. So you've got to put all of that in place, and all of that needs to be in place before you sign with a vendor or an implement.
Great. So, James, before the last question, I want to push back on something you have described a system designed to keep clients uninformed and dependent. But I have sat with the CFOs at these renowned companies. So, some of the most capable financial leaders in the region, they push back hard on vendors. They challenge assumptions and they ask difficult questions, and they still end up with the system that they do not deliver. So, is it really about the client empowerment, or is it the information symmetry so deep, so the structurally embedded in the way that this industry sells itself, that even the most informed clients cannot overcome it alone?
The challenge is that the whole mindset is upside down. The world believes they teach at university, they teach at undergraduate level on IT, information technology, whatever projects, they teach on MBAs. The way to do this sort of project is you start by mapping business processes. As I said a few minutes ago, business processes come at the end of the project as a design output. They're not the input. You start at the top with strategy. So in the case that you've just, the the chief financial officer is going in with his hands cut off because he thinks
So,
that the basic methodology is right. Instead of saying, you know what, first of all, I need the CEO in custodianship. Secondly, I need a strategic definition. Thirdly, we need to get the precision configuration correctly defined. Oh, and then by the way, we'll look at the processes in the laboratory. So you've got to turn the whole thing absolutely on its head and step back. And you've got to do that in a way that empowers that CFO to actually lead that conversation, have that conversation. And for the C-suite, the CFO, the COO, the CIO, etc., with the CEO to sit in a room with that vendor and say, you know what, Mr. Vendor, what you're telling us is wrong. this is the way we're going to do it. And, if you're not going to do that, well, we'll go with somebody else. And sorry, on that point, there's a big piece that a lot of the time you don't need to replace your ERP. ERP is infrastructure. You don't go and rip up the rail lines every 5 years because somebody's produced a better train. An ERP investment should have a minimum life expectancy of 20 years. If you've got an ERP that's been there for 5 years and somebody's telling you to replace it, no. What you need to do, because the fact is, because if people implement at this level that I'm talking about, which is they do 80% of the work that delivers 20% of the value, go back, remediate the way I've described, and unlock the 20% of the work that will deliver 80% of the value. So take your present ERP and re-implement it or remediate it and say, right, chart of accounts is a mess, item class is a mess, etc., etc., etc. Let's fix all of those things, and suddenly your present ERP is up here. There's absolutely no reason, if you put in a new ERP 5 or 10 years ago, to replace that today. Certainly, if you're running one of the big brands, ERP, Oracle, Microsoft, etc., if you're running one of those brands that's been in place for 10 years, 15 years, there is absolutely no reason to replace it. You need to fix it.
Got it. So, last question, James. In 36 years, you have ever seen an ERP implementation done genuinely right, not on time, not on budget, strategically right? The CFO can answer the board questions live and accurately. The organization owns its own knowledge. The consultant is no longer required. Has that happened? And what were the people who commissioned it doing that almost nobody else does?
I've done it a couple of times. That's where the accelerator comes from. I sat back and I said, remember, I discovered this way of doing things. I've never had any formal IT training apart from computer science in first year university in 72. And I just did, and some projects worked and some projects didn't work. And I said, well, why didn't that work? Okay, I don't think this will work, so let's try something else. And so I had some successes and I've had my share of failures. Please understand, because you learn by failing. What's his name? Musk in the States with his SpaceX rockets. Says, okay, well, it blew up. Doesn't matter. We're learning because we're learning through failure. Well, it's kind of quite a mind-boggling concept, but I've learned through failure. So I've had a couple of successes, but as a one-man operation. The thing about what I'm saying is when you step right back and you look at what I'm saying, it's so obviously practically the right way to do things that I have great confidence that can be applied to any size organization. You're going to need a bit of time from me, but it can be done.
Got it. So, Mark Bendamer said on this show, capital does not reject ideas, it rejects unprepared operators. James just spent 35 minutes proving the same is true of every ERP systems ever built. Every CFO and finance director listening to this now has a choice. Before the next vendor presentation, before the next contract is signed, about which side of the variable they want it to be on. So, James Robertson, the ERP doctor, the most honest conversation about ERP failure I have ever recorded in this show. Thank you, James.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you, and look forward. Maybe we can do another one on some of the details in the future.
Definitely. I am Mohammed Younus. This execution gap where the conversation that should not recorded get recorded. If this changed how you think about your next implementation decision, share it with one person sitting on the risk right now. We will see you in the next one.